Elvis awoke before dawn, eyelids heavy with the residue of last night's arguments. His body ached from the relentless beat of spotlights and the roar of Vegas crowds. Yet it was the sharper sting of Colonel Parker's voice over the telephone that still echoed in his mind. He lay in the jungle room, its lamps off, the thick carpet cool beneath him. Satin curtains stirred across the windows as an unseen breeze teased the humid Tennessee air. Under the muted hum of the old air conditioner, his heart pounded with the stress of an unending tour schedule. He rose, fingers numb, and moved to the small desk tucked beside the mixing console. A slick of perspiration glistened on his forehead as he powered up the rotary phone. Its static crackle, a drum roll for another round of negotiations. His reflection in the darkened glass of the jukebox behind him was gaunt. Dark circles under kohl-rimmed eyes, sensual lips stretched tight over clenched teeth. He dialed the colonel. "Morning, Colonel," he said, voice sounding ragged even to his own ears. "Elvis, we need confirmation on the Vegas residency. 4 weeks, you said? That'll lock in the dates for October through November?" Parker's nasal tone crackled with urgency. "Fans are already buying tickets. We can't afford to waver." Elvis closed his eyes. He could almost see the endless neon of the desert, the throng of faces lit by his rhinestones. He could feel the familiar rush, the intoxicating power of the stage. But behind that exhilaration lurked a deeper truth. He hadn't slept more than 3 hours a night in weeks, and his chest ached like a warning shot fired to halt him in his tracks. "Colonel, I need a break," he said quietly, fighting to keep the tremor out of his voice. "Doc says my heart can't handle this pace." There was a long pause. Parker's exasperated sigh came over the wire. "You can't back out now. You owe the show. The show owes you. This is your biggest contract yet." Elvis gripped the phone. Every muscle in his body quivered. He imagined himself on stage, voice soaring through a medley, each note a fragment of his soul offered to the crowd. But the cost had mounted. Empty hours at home, a long shadowed by missed birthdays and silences where laughter should have been. He hung up, the receiver's click loud against the hum. The jungle room fell silent once more, as though the walls had absorbed the final echo of Parker's demands. Elvis slid a hand down the back of his neck, wincing at the tension in his spine. He needed air, clarity, anything to cut through the relentless schedule his manager imposed. Meanwhile, upstairs in Graceland's grand hall, Lisa Marie sat on the bottom step of the sweeping staircase. She wore her favorite nightgown, soft cotton patterned with tiny blue roses, and clutched a flimsy sheet of paper in small, nervous hands. The wood beneath her was cool, the banister smooth against her knuckles as she smoothed the edges of her note. "Can we talk tonight? Love, Lisa?" She folded the paper 3 times, pressing each crease carefully before tucking it into the pocket of her nightdress. Then she rose and tiptoed down the hallway toward her father's suite, listening for the familiar murmur of voices through the closed doors. But the corridors were empty, every door sealed against the late-night quiet. Only the faint drone of a distant phone line carried the promise of conversation, one she feared might never come. Lisa Marie's heart fluttered with worry. Yesterday, Elvis had promised he'd attend her school play. But the morning had arrived, and he'd vanished into calls and contracts. The nanny said her father was very busy, that she should be patient. But patience was a cold comfort when all she craved was a moment of his attention. She sank back onto the first step, hugging her doll's carry case to her chest, and stared at the dark oak beneath her feet. Down in the jungle room corridor, Elvis bumped the receiver back onto its cradle and massaged his temples. He'd buried his exhaustion under makeup and sequins for years, but today the facade cracked. He drained his glass of scotch in a single swallow and strode from the room, halting at the staircase where the hush of midnight gave way to the faint creak of floorboards above. A small sob drifted down to him. He froze, recognizing that tremulous note. Lisa Marie's tears. He climbed the steps two at a time, the crumpled note falling from his pocket to the carpet behind him. In the landing's dim pool of lamplight, he saw her, her small form curled against the wall, eyes shining with unshed tears, the paper in her lap. "Baby?" His voice cracked with both fatigue and guilt. He knelt beside her, gulping down the last of his resolve. "What's wrong?" She thrust out the note. "You promised," she whispered, voice fragile as porcelain. "You said you'd come. But you never did." Elvis's chest tightened. He picked up the paper, fingers shaking as he read the simple plea. The weight of his commitments, contracts, press, performances, suddenly felt like chains he had chosen for himself. He sat back on his heels, drawing his daughter close. His makeup smeared beneath his eyes as he pressed his lips to the top of her head. "I'm so sorry," he murmured. "I got lost in all of it, and I forgot what matters most." He unfolded the note and tucked it into his coat. "No more promises I can't keep. Tonight, we talk. Just us." Lisa Marie's tears spilled over, but she nodded against his chest. He slid his arm around her, pulling her into the stairwell's hush. Behind them, the mansion's corridors stood patient and silent, awaiting the moment when a father, at last, would listen to his daughter's voice above the roar of any stage. Elvis Presley stood in the quiet expanse of the Graceland driveway long after dawn had broken, the morning sun gilding everything in honeyed light. He wore jeans and a faded chambray shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, an outfit chosen for inconspicuousness, not fashion. Beside him, his driver idled in the Cadillac Fleetwood brougham, engine ticking as it cooled. "Elvis, sir," Thomas said gently, sensing the tension coiling in his friend's back. "You sure you want to do this without any of the boys riding shotgun?" Elvis pressed his jaw shut. "No press," he replied, tone final. "No police involvement. I'll handle it myself." He placed a hand on the hood's cool metal, feeling the weight of his decision settle in his bones. "Find Linda Craven. Quietly. Just need a name, a town, that's all." Thomas nodded, already reaching for his notebook. Elvis rose into the car, settled into the rear seat, and the driver pulled away, leaving Graceland's gates behind. The highway stretched out beneath a sky streaked with clouds and the first warmth of morning. Elvis stared out the tinted window, mind replaying the black-and-white prom picture that had arrived with the infant at his gate. In that photograph, he was 18, towering beside Linda's gentle frame, their hands clasped beneath a banner of crepe paper tassels. He'd been too eager to leave Tupelo, too hungry for a stage, to realize the fragility of what he left behind. Now, some 20-odd years later, that photograph felt like a verdict. Linda had signed the note M. The precise loop of her cursive still vivid in his mind. No last name, no address, only the promise that she was out there, somewhere. According to a former bandmate who'd caught glimpse of her years back, she'd lived in Lebanon, Tennessee. Working nurse Hearsay had painted a dreary picture. Linda in a wheelchair, weakened by an illness that stole her strength. Her brightness dimmed by poverty and pride. Elvis's knuckles whitened around the photograph as he slipped it into his shirt pocket. "Lebanon," he murmured. He turned off the highway at a sign faded from years of sun. "Welcome to Lebanon." The town's tumble of low-slung houses and red brick storefronts rolled past. He slipped into Charlie's Cafe on the edge of town, a greasy spoon where the coffee was strong, and the waitresses didn't ask questions. He parked in the lot, heart hammering, and stepped inside. The clink of dishes and the hum of a battered jukebox greeted him. A waitress in a starched blue uniform set a steaming mug at the counter. Her eyes flicked to him, recognized something unusual in his manner. Then she looked away, refilling the sugar dispenser. Elvis stood at the threshold of the dining area, scanning the booths. At the far end, closest to a pair of rain-spotted windows, sat a woman in a wheelchair. Her once dark hair had thinned and silvered, her face lined by years of hardship. Yet something in her posture, the tilt of her head toward the door, hinted at the same gentle strength he remembered. He paused, throat tight. Steps to the back, he found her attendant, a pale man with nervous hands. "Excuse me," Elvis said quietly. "I'm looking for Linda Craven." The attendant's eyes widened. He leaned closer and nodded toward the woman. "That's her," he said in a low voice. "She's been waiting." Elvis moved forward, staff and diners parting instinctively, as though sensing the gravity of the moment. Linda's eyes flickered up at his approach, recognition and shock mingling in her gaze. For a heartbeat, she said nothing. "Linda?" he asked softly. Sliding into the seat opposite her, he removed his sunglasses, letting the overhead light catch the gold in his eyes. "It's me." She pressed her lips together, swallowing. The attendant slipped away, leaving them alone. She reached up a trembling hand and brushed the photograph from his shirt pocket, unfolding it on the table until the prom night scene lay between them. In that instant, years crumpled into dust. "Elvis," she said, voice barely above a whisper. I thought that photograph was lost." He leaned forward, resting forearms on the formica. "You left a basket at my gate," he said, tone gentle but urgent. "A note signed M. I need to know why you abandoned him." Linda's breath caught. She trailed a finger down the prom scene, his arm around her waist, her white sweater luminous beneath the gym lights. She inhaled, pain twisting her face. "I was unwell," she began, voice cracking. "Not then. Years later. When I realized I couldn't care for him, I panicked." She looked down. "I was in and out of hospitals. No strength, no money. And I couldn't bear to see him with strangers." Elvis's chest tightened. He closed his eyes, the clatter of the cafe receding as he summoned every ounce of calm he possessed. "He was never in strangers' hands," he said quietly. "He was at Graceland from the moment we found him." Linda's head snapped up. "You took him in, raised him." Tears sparkled in her eyes. "I thought you'd hate me." He shook his head, leaning back. "You did what you thought was best." He exhaled, the air between them thick with memory. "I'm sorry you suffered alone." She bit her lip, words catching. Then, in a tremulous whisper, I couldn't let my son be signed over to someone I didn't know. I feared they'd sell him, or worse." Elvis's throat ached. He reached across and took her hand, wrinkled, fragile, but hers. "He's safe," he said, "and so are you." In the hush of the cafe, amid chipped mugs and the hiss of the grill, two souls reunited, not under the glitz of spotlights, but beneath the gentle glow of shared forgiveness. And for the first time in years, Elvis Presley felt true relief. The knowledge that the song of a lifetime's longing had found its missing verse at last. Elvis eased the Cadillac Fleetwood brougham through Graceland's gates again, as the late morning sun cast long shadows across the magnolia-lined drive. In the back seat, the infant stirred but did not cry, small fists flexing against the soft blanket. Lisa Marie peered back at him from her booster seat, eyes wide with wonder. Elvis offered a gentle nod. "Welcome home, little man." Inside, the staff had prepared a quiet wing adjacent to Lisa Marie's bedroom. Nurse Carter, a woman with kind eyes and steady hands, showed Elvis the new nursery. Buttery yellow walls, a wicker cradle draped with pastel quilts, and a changing table stocked with tiny outfits. The door bore a small brass plaque, "Baby Boy Presley." Elvis knelt and unwrapped the blanket, lifting the child into his arms as though cradling porcelain. He examined the baby's face, soft cheek, rosebud mouth, and murmured, "I'll keep you safe." Over the next 2 days, Graceland settled into an unusual rhythm. Lisa Marie, thrilled by her new brother, spent hours offering him toy rattles and lullabies. Elvis, despite a schedule that Parker had already complained about twice, canceled morning rehearsals and devoted himself to learning the baby's patterns. When the infant cooed for feeding, how he curled his toes before falling asleep. The estate felt peaceful, an oasis untouched by the glare of spotlights. But on the third night, as the humid summer air pressed against the windows, alarm jolted Elvis from sleep. Nurse Carter's urgent knock echoed through the corridor. He burst into the nursery to find the baby's skin flushed and damp with fever. The infant's chest heaved, each breath a tiny struggle. Carter pressed her stethoscope against his rib cage and grimaced. "Mr. Presley, I'm concerned," she said softly. "I hear a heart murmur. A congenital issue. He needs immediate evaluation." Her voice was calm but firm, as though she were delivering a verdict. Elvis's heart clenched. Without a word, he scooped the baby into his arms and charged down the grand staircase, Lisa Marie's bewildered face peeking from behind the banister. They arrived at the awaiting Cadillac. Elvis jumped into the driver's seat with the baby cradled against his chest. His driver gave a curt nod and floored the accelerator. The car roared onto Highway 51, its headlights carving through the night as they sped toward Baptist Memorial Hospital. Each red tail light ahead dwindled into darkness, as if swallowed by grief. Inside the hospital's emergency entrance, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The antiseptic tang of disinfectant stung Elvis's nostrils as he dashed past the intake desk, baby in his arms. Nurse Carter followed, her expression taut but composed. An orderly led them through echoing hallways tiled in pale green, the wobble of wheeled stretchers and distant beeps forming a frantic symphony. They reached a curtained bay where a stern-faced cardiologist awaited. He glanced at the baby, then at Elvis's tense frame. "Mr. Presley?" he asked, surprise flickering in his eyes. You're the child's guardian?" Elvis nodded, voice low. "Yes, he's been in my care for 2 days. I was told to bring him here immediately." The doctor's gaze shifted to the baby's chart. Recognition softened his features. "This is the same infant we treated 3 weeks ago," he said, almost to himself. "Brought in for dehydration and a minor respiratory infection." He frowned. "We noted a murmur then, but the parents, guardians, weren't forthcoming." He bore into Elvis. "Is there a possibility of neglect?" Elvis's jaw tightened. "He was abandoned at my gates. I've had him in my personal care since." He forced his voice to remain even, though anger and concern warred beneath his calm. "What's his condition?" The cardiologist motioned toward a portable echocardiogram machine. "He has a ventricular septal defect, a hole between the heart's chambers. It explains the fever, the murmur. He'll need monitoring in the pediatric ICU and, eventually, surgery." The doctor's tone was clinical but compassionate. "Immediate stabilization." Elvis exhaled, tension draining from his shoulders. "Do what's needed," he said simply. I'll be here." As the team whisked the baby away, Elvis lingered in the hallway bathed in sickly fluorescent glare. Nurse Carter patted his arm, offering silent solidarity. He raised his gaze to the sterile ceiling, then exhaled. The corridors were quiet now, but for the distant hum of ventilators and the steady pulse of his own heartbeat. He realized how fiercely he had grown to love this child in just days. He walked toward the ICU nurses' station, each step measured against the weight of his vow. No one would hurt this baby again. Graceland's lights, concerts, and contracts felt a world away compared to the fragile life he was determined to protect. In that hushed hospital corridor, surrounded by the antiseptic chill, Elvis Presley understood that his greatest role was not performer or legend, but guardian, standing watch over a small heartbeat entrusted to him, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The morning sunlight slanted through the hospital blinds in soft stripes as Elvis stood at his son's bedside, smoothing the thin blankets around him. The steady beep of the cardiac monitor had become a lullaby of reassurance over the past days. The infant's oxygen levels were stable, the fever broken, and the arrhythmia under vigilant watch. Lisa Marie perched on the edge of a plastic visitor's chair, clutching her father's hand in small, trusting fingers. When the doctor gave the final nod, Elvis exhaled sharply. "This morning," he said, voice warm with relief, "we go home." That afternoon, Elvis gathered his attorney in the Graceland study, its walls lined with gold records and faded photographs of his triumphs. The lawyer spread a stack of documents across the mahogany desk: petitions for emergency guardianship, affidavits sworn under oath, and a declaration of intention to adopt. Elvis fingered the top page, his eyes steady, resolve clear. "I want full custody," he said, voice firm. "I don't care what the press or the courts say. He's my son now." The attorney adjusted his glasses. "We'll file everything by noon. The court will schedule a hearing within 2 weeks. Until then, you're his legal guardian." Elvis signed line after line, each stroke of the pen sealing a promise more powerful than any contract he had signed for his performances. When the last document bore his signature, he laid the pen aside and leaned back, feet propped on the desk. Lisa Marie peeked in, peering curiously at the papers. Elvis ruffled her hair. "That's Mommy's job, kiddo," he said with a grin. "We're official." By evening, the tabloids had discovered the filing. Headlines blazed across newsstands. "Elvis files to adopt foundling." "King of Rock becomes daddy." Cameras flashed at the gates. Scribes chattered into recorders beneath Graceland's wrought iron fence. And commuters in downtown Memphis overheard DJs spinning rumors like they were hit singles. Colonel Parker's office phones rang off the hook. The colonel paced in his plush chair, spectacles sliding down his nose as he fumed into the receiver. "You'll destroy your image. Sponsors will flee. Vegas will cancel. You can't be living in a nursery more than a stage." Elvis listened in silence. When Parker finally took a breath, Elvis's reply was calm but unyielding. "This is bigger than royalties, Colonel. I'm doing what a man must do. If my brand can't survive that, then it wasn't worth preserving." He hung up, the last echo of Parker's sputter fading into the mahogany paneling. 2 weeks later, the circus lights of the International Hotel Ballet Room in Las Vegas hummed to life. Elvis had returned to the stage for a special, unannounced set, one that would pay tribute not to his legacy, but to his new family. Backstage, he slipped into a simple black suit, banishing rhinestones for the first time in years. Nurse Carter stood by with the infant swaddled in a soft blanket, Lisa Marie clutching her father's hand. Linda Craven, her wheelchair draped in a velvet throw, sat in the third row, face turned upward in the soft glow of the footlights. The conductor beckoned, and the orchestra launched into the first bars of Suspicious Minds. Applause roared. But as the chorus ended, Elvis raised a gloved hand for silence. Microphone in hand, he spoke across the hush. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice resonant, "tonight is not a show. This is something else." The ballroom lights dimmed, except for a single spotlight on the stool beside him. He sat, setting the microphone stand aside, and offered the audience a vulnerable smile. He began an unfamiliar ballad, its melody slow, mournful, rising and falling like a confession. I found a heartbeat in the dark, a promise whispered in the night. No one recognized the tune, yet the hush deepened, as if every soul in the room leaned closer to catch each thread of his voice. When that song finished, he exhaled and launched into a gospel-tinged number brimming with hope. Though shadows linger in my past, I walk by faith, not by sight. Tears glistened on Lisa Marie's cheeks. Linda pressed her lips together in a quiet smile. The audience sat in stunned silence, feeling they were witnessing something sacred, not merely entertainment. Finally, Elvis stood and picked up his guitar for the third piece. He drew a breath and began, "Love Me Tender." But as the familiar chords unfurled, his lyrics shifted beneath the melody. "To the child I never knew I wanted, to the love that showed me home." Every word landed like a solitary star in the velvet sky of the ballroom. When the final note quivered into stillness, the silence held, pregnant, powerful, enduring. Then, gently, the audience rose in a standing ovation, not thunderous but heartfelt, each clap a benediction of acceptance. Elvis stepped back from the mic, eyes damp but triumphant. He looked toward Linda, toward Lisa Marie, toward the swaddled infant in Nurse Carter's arms. In that silent embrace of applause, he found the affirming echo of his vow, to be the man his family needed, above all else. And as the lights brightened on the final bow, Elvis Presley, no longer just the king of rock and roll, but a father and husband, felt more alive under that Vegas chandelier than any stage had ever given him. He woke to the hush before dawn, lying in a crisp hospital bed beneath a single fluorescent lamp that trembled like a heartbeat. The room was a capsule of white, walls pale as prayer flags, the linoleum floor gleaming under sterile light, the faint scent of antiseptic mingling with the night's cool breeze drifting through a cracked window. His heart still throbbed with exhaustion and relief. Relief that the surgeons had stabilized his daughter's condition. Relief that she slept peacefully in the bassinet beside him. Yet sleep eluded Elvis Presley. His mind replayed the day's fears and the hollow echo of his daughter's labored breaths. On the small table next to his bed, cluttered with water carafes and medical charts, a cassette tape lay waiting, its plastic case worn by curious fingers. He stared at it, hesitated. The label, written in uneven childlike scrawl, read simply, "For Daddy," and beneath, in crayon, "Love, Lisa." He closed his eyes, inhaled the hush, and reached out. Fingers trembling, he lifted the tape from its resting place and slid it into the bedside cassette player. He pressed play. A soft hiss crackled, static unfurling like a sigh under the speaker's diaphragm, and then, "Hi, Daddy," came Lisa Marie's voice, clear and bright as sunlight striking a window pane. "Today, I made a picture of you smiling, but I think you don't smile at home anymore." The tape's fidelity wavered for a heartbeat. Her voice trembled against the hiss, then steadied, crystalline. "Mommy says you're tired, but I think you're lonely." Elvis's eyes flew open. The hush of the ward closed in around him. He pressed his feet to the floor, head spinning as the memory in that tiny voice cracked open something deep within him. Flashback. Graceland, 1965. Sunlight danced across honey oak floorboards as he lifted a giggling toddler into the air above the jungle room's draped green curtains. She shrieked with delight, arms flailing, as he twirled her across the plush carpet. His sequined jumpsuit caught fire in the afternoon light. Her tiny feet kicked at his belt loops. He set her down, and she threw herself into his arms, her laughter a bell in the cavern of his life. He remembered brushing a smudge of jelly from her cheek as she perched on his shoulders, both of them lost in the carefree ecstasy of an unfettered afternoon. Flashback. Graceland dining room, 1973. The dining table stood empty beneath shadows cast by flickering chandeliers. He sat at the head like a lonely monarch, suit jacket unbuttoned, tie slack. The telephone next to his dinner plate rang ceaselessly. Calls from Vegas, from the label, from the colonel. He stared at the handset, guilt knotting in his chest. He picked it up, voice flat with exhaustion. Yes, I'll be there. He replaced the receiver and bowed his head, realizing he hadn't seen Lisa Marie smile in weeks. Back in the hospital room, the tape's hiss circled him like a slow wind. He cradled his daughter's cassette recorder under one arm, tears pricking at his eyes. The nurse's overhead monitor beeped a steady caution, but this recording, was a lifeline. The raw honesty of her small voice, the ache simmering beneath her words, cut through the dozen demands of his life. Tours, contracts, the unending roar of fame. He let the tears come. For the first time in years, he wept not on a stage before thousands, but in this hushed chamber of tile and bed rails. His shoulders heaved in a shuddered exhale. Lisa had said he was lonely, and in that confession lay the map back to himself. He pressed stop, lifting the recorder to his lips. "Baby," he whispered, voice cracking. "I hear you." Gently, he placed the recorder on the bedside ledge, turning off the lamp so darkness could cradle him as he rocked. Through the sliver of open window came the first cry of a morning songbird, a single note of hope. He closed his eyes and held his daughter's voice close, promising himself, for her sake, to learn again how to smile. Elvis pulled into Graceland just as the late afternoon sun gilded the live oaks lining the driveway. He wore simple slacks and a white polo. No stage costume, no sequins, only a man exhausted from nights in sterile hospital halls. Nurse Carter waved him off as she tucked the baby beneath a pale quilt in the nursery bassinet. Lisa Marie, still wrapped in her robe, clung to a small pink teddy bear. Elvis pressed his palm to the nursery doorframe. "I'm not scheduling any shows for a few weeks," he said, voice low but resolute. "We'll just be here." He saw relief flicker in Lisa Marie's eyes, his promise more precious than any promise of gold records. Once the nurse left, Elvis lingered, breathing in the faint tang of baby powder and the honeyed warmth of the room. He noticed the pale buttercup yellow walls offset by sky blue trim, and that wall of star-spangled posters he'd once hung for Lisa's birthdays. Elvis cartooned as a rock-and-roll superhero, guitars glowing in neon. But his gaze drifted to the dresser in the corner. Whitewashed wood, its surface mottled by smudges of wax crayon and the impression of 1,000 tiny fingertips. He knelt and eased open the top drawer. There, beneath the folded blankets and the stack of bedtime storybooks, lay a row of Lisa's drawings, each one crumpled at the edges, pressed flat by time. He pulled out the first picture, a crude crayon sketch of a sorrowful house with blue windows. Behind one window, an adult figure stood on a stage, arms outstretched, while a small figure peered from inside, isolated. On the back, in Lisa's careful scrawl, "Wish you stayed longer." One by one, he examined them. Identical scenes, each iteration more desperate. A child alone behind glass, a father reaching out but fading into the spotlight beyond. His chest squeezed as he traced the lines with his thumb, the waxy scent of crayons rising like old regrets. He closed the drawer and stood, heart heavy. Those pictures had been her secret diaries, chronicling every night he'd left to chase an encore. Now, like a confession, they lay bare the cost of his absence. Elvis slipped from the nursery and wandered down the hallway to the kitchen, where the late summer light cast long rectangles on checkered linoleum. The kettle's whistle had long since ceased. Priscilla sat at the oak table, fingers wrapped around a chipped blue mug of coffee. The scent of cinnamon toast lingered in the air, mingling with the faint tang of fresh paint from the nursery walls. She looked up without surprise, as though she'd been expecting him. For a moment, neither spoke, only the tick of the wall clock and the distant hum of Graceland's fountain. Elvis pulled out a chair beside her. It scraped once on the floor, settling him close enough to smell her lavender shampoo. They sat shoulder to shoulder, an island of quiet in the heart of the sprawling mansion. "I found her drawings," he said at last, voice rough. "She's been telling me things without words." Priscilla nodded, eyes soft. "She needs you more than the audience does," she said quietly, setting her mug aside. "And you know it." He swallowed, gaze fixed on the table's wood grain. "I've been so busy. I thought I was giving her the best of me, but I wasn't there." Priscilla reached out and placed her hand over his. "She's 8, she reminded him. 8 isn't too young to need her father's full heart." He closed his eyes, the weight of his failures pressing in. A single sunbeam slanted across the table, illuminating a stray crayon smear at the edge of a placemat. An accidental echo of those hidden pictures. He looked up at Priscilla, seeing not the ex-wife or the queen of his past, but a mother who understood those silent cries. Silence stretched between them. No bitterness, only shared resolve. He nodded once. "I'll make it right," he vowed, voice small but fierce. "No more empty rooms when she needs me." Priscilla's fingers tightened around his. "She's waiting," she whispered. "Just come home to her." Outside, the cicadas droned in the twilight, their chorus a gentle reminder that life moved forward. Inside, father and mother sat together, turning a new page in a story that had been written in quiet tears and crayon lines. And in that steady calm, Elvis Presley discovered that true fame lay not in the roar of the crowd, but in the hush of an answered need. Elvis eased into the low swivel chair in his jungle room hideaway, the muted glow of a single floor lamp bathing the green velvet drapes in lamplight. Outside, the humid Memphis air pulsed against the glass doors, but here the temperature was set just cool enough to keep the sweat from his brow. He stared at the array of tape reels and mixing boards lining the walls, his tools for capturing the roar of an audience. But tonight, those machines felt foreign, instruments of a life that no longer fit. He lifted the receiver of the rotary phone, its ivory dial gleaming under the lamp's halo. He paced in the narrow strip of carpet between the mixing console and the grand piano in the corner, its lid closed like a secret, waiting to be told. The phone shrilled once, twice, then clicked as Jerry Schilling answered, voice weary. "Jerry," Elvis began, his voice low and taut. "I'm not sure I can do it anymore. I don't know if I can sing those songs the way she needs me to." Jerry's silence filled the room like a weight. He'd been through the glamour and the gravity of every Vegas opening, But this was different. "Elvis, you gotta do what's in here," he said with a soft thud to his words. He tapped the side of his chest. Elvis closed his eyes, picturing Lisa Marie's small figure waiting by her door. The tremor in her voice when she first whispered, "Please don't be angry, Daddy." He exhaled, harsh enough to ruffle the curtains. "Not if she thinks I'm a ghost at home," he admitted, the truth hurtling free. There was a long pause on the line before Jerry spoke again. "You don't need a crowd." "Not tonight. You can sing only for her. One time. Here, in Graceland. Just record it. No cameras, no Parker, no ticket sales. You owe her that much." Elvis gripped the receiver so tightly his knuckles whitened. He looked over at the piano, its lacquered wood gleaming like onyx in the lamp's pool of light. He rose, lifting the phone from his shoulder cradle. "Do it," he said, voice stronger now. "Bring that piano front and center. I want every last note to be for her." Half an hour later, the jungle room felt transformed. The grand piano's lid stood open, revealing ivories that caught the lamplight with a soft sheen. Two floor lamps with amber shades cast chevrons of light across the shag carpet, and the mixing console was bathed in patchwork illumination from dozens of glowing meters. A small tape deck sat on the soundboard, its reels already spinning in anticipation. Lisa Marie peered around the chipped wood doorframe, her robe slipping from one shoulder as she crouched on tiptoes. Her eyes widened at the sight. Her father, in simple black slacks and a white t-shirt, stepping toward the piano not as a superstar, but as a man searching for something precious. She pressed her palm to the door's edge, the varnish warm beneath her fingers. Elvis settled onto the piano bench, the sound of furniture moving still echoing in the alcove. Jerry stood to one side, arms folded, face soft with respect. No other staff waited, no cameras clicked, no flick of a manager's pen dictated the moment. Only the gentle swish of drapes and the quiet hum of the hidden air conditioner kept time. He closed his eyes and laid his fingers on the keys, the weight of the evening's promise settling around him like a cloak. The first chord rang out, a simple E major, piano's voice blossoming into the hushed room. Then another, C sharp minor. He tapped the pedals lightly, letting each note resonate in the green velvet silence. Lisa Marie slid in behind him, drawn to the melody, her doll forgotten on the threshold. She placed a small foot on the bottom rung of the bench, peering over his shoulder. She felt a thrill in her chest. Her father was playing just for her, and every note seemed to wrap around her like a lullaby. Elvis opened his eyes and began to sing, voice hushed yet fervent. "In the stillness of this night, I find my way back home." His verse wove through the air, bare of spectacle, each word a confession. Jerry reached over and tapped the record button. The red lamp blinked. "Rack." Elvis's voice cracked on the high notes, rough with years of roaring crowds, but it trembled with sincerity. He played the melody that had once floated through a high school gym, the song he'd written for the prom queen all those years ago. Now the lyrics bore new meaning. "Little girl, I hear your plea. I lost my smile. I lost my way. But here tonight, I sing to thee." At the piano's edge, Lisa Marie pressed closer, her breath catching as she recognized each phrase. The shadows on the walls shifted with the lamp's glow, turning the jungle room into a cathedral of private music. When the final chords drifted into silence, Elvis let his hands rest on the keys. He turned to face his daughter, eyes shining. She took a breath, then climbed onto the bench beside him. Her little arms wrapped around his neck as she whispered, "You sound like home again." Elvis bowed his head into her hair, the hush around them more profound than any stadium roar. Jerry cut the tape, and the only sound was the slow thump of the record button unwinding. The moment stretched, a quiet promise captured in amber light. This song, this voice, belonged to no one but her. And in that private epicenter of sound and shadow, Elvis Presley felt whole for the first time in years, no longer a ghost chasing echoes, but a father rediscovered in a single shining note. Elvis sat with his back to the mixing console, the record light finally extinguished, leaving the jungle room bathed in the soft, golden glow of 2 floor lamps. His fingers hovered over the ivory keys, dust motes drifting like fireflies in the lamplight. No sheet music lay open before him, only the weight of a lifetime's worth of melodies buried beneath layers of fame. He inhaled, listening to the beat of his own heart echoing in the hush. He pressed a single note, low and resonant, the opening of a song he'd hummed 50 times but never recorded. It was a tune from the schoolyard, a lullaby he'd once sung to himself as a frightened boy in Tupelo. He closed his eyes and let the memory guide his hands. The melody rose slowly, a wandering path of thirds and fifths, supple and tentative. His voice followed, fragile at first, then gathering quiet strength. Soft as summer rain on cotton fields, whispered prayers in an empty night. No drummer, no orchestra, just the piano's warm glow and his unadorned voice, cracked by decades of crooning to packed arenas, but now steadied by the singular act of confession. He let each phrase hang between the green velvet drapes, each word a secret released. At the doorway, Lisa Marie watched in silence. Her small frame blocked the threshold, nightgown brushing the carpet. She craned her neck, mesmerized by the unexpected scene. Her father, without cape or sequins, performing for no one but her. The glow of the lamps formed a halo around him. The rest of the room melted into shadow. She took a careful step forward, breath held, as if afraid to shatter the magic. Elvis shifted, the final note trailing off like a sigh. He glanced up, voice hushed. "This one. I learned it when I was 8. His tone held the weight of years. Never sang it again. Lisa Marie stepped into the circle of light, her doll tucked under one arm. She settled at her father's feet, hands folded in her lap like a small queen at court. Elvis offered a wry smile, fingers brushing a few stray notes to test the lingering resonance. He began again, more assured now, letting the melody unfurl in gentle arcs. "Hold on, restless heart, the dawn will come. Find your way by love's quiet drum." He paused, listening to the empty spaces between lines, the silent breaths where life itself seemed to pulse. Then he played a brief improvised bridge, chords bending into unexpected harmonies, each transition a subtle declaration of hope. Silence returned, profound and still. The air felt thick with the absence of applause, richer for its intimacy. Lisa Marie rose softly, slipping onto the bench beside him. She reached out, fingers brushing the back of his hand where it rested on the keys. He turned to her, eyebrows lifting in gentle question. She swallowed, voice small but certain. "You sound like home again." Her words hung in the hush, a benediction more powerful than any standing ovation. Elvis swallowed hard, throat tight with emotion. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. The piano's lid reflected the lamp's glow, the keys dark and silent beneath his palm. Jerry Schilling, who had stepped in just beyond the drapes to witness the moment, dared not breathe. He pressed the record button again, not to capture a hit, but to preserve a truth. A father's reclaimed voice singing only for his daughter. In that single room, amid the soft rustle of fabric and the distant hum of air conditioning, the world shrank to two souls. No contracts, no cameras, no colonel's demands, nothing but the faint echo of a melody reborn. Father and daughter remained wrapped in the afterglow, the final chord vibrating through the floorboards like a pulse. In your arms, I find my song, and here, at last, I belong. Elvis dipped his head into Lisa Marie's hair, and she pressed a kiss against his cheek. Together, they sat in stillness, a silent duet of love and redemption, knowing that no stage, no spotlight, could ever shine brighter than this hushed, sacred piece. The drawing room lay hushed beneath a quilt of twilight, the only illumination a single table lamp casting long, soft shadows over the oriental rug. The old grandfather clock in the corner ticked steadily, each click a reminder that time, like opportunity, slipped away in silence. Outside, cicadas murmured against the magnolia trees. Inside, the house stood still, as if holding its breath. Elvis Presley sat in his favorite wingback chair, one elbow resting on the carved arm, the weight of the day folded into the slump of his shoulders. His sequined jumpsuit hung on a hanger across the room, abandoned for the plain comfort of slacks and shirt. Only moments before, the muffled roar of Colonel Parker's furious voice had drifted through the walls, harsh consonants condemning Elvis's refusal to head back to Vegas. The memory of that argument still knotted his gut. Lisa Marie slipped silently into the room, her bare feet soundless on thick carpet. She carried her small, well-worn teddy bear, its fur threadbare at the ear. She paused near the archway, blue eyes wide as they met her father's. For a moment, neither spoke. Only the clock's heartbeat and the whisper of wind through open windows. Finally, she approached, voice tentative as a whisper. "Are you sick, Daddy?" Her words trembled on the night air. "I heard Colonel Parker yelling on the phone." She perched on the edge of the chaise, Teddy clutched to her chest, gaze flicking to her father's drawn face. Elvis's jaw clenched. He swallowed, bereft of the usual quips that fell so readily on stage. For the first time, he found no words to cover the ache inside him. He rose and crossed the distance, seating himself on the chaise beside her. He draped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close so she could lean into his warmth. "Don't worry," he murmured, voice rough. "But tell me if you ever feel like I'm not here, okay?" He pressed a kiss to the top of her head, as though pledging his presence in that breath. Lisa Marie's head tilted back, the lamplight glinting in her eyes. She hugged her bear tighter, as if to brace herself. After a pause that felt endless, she spoke, her voice clear, unwavering, though each word trembled with fear. "Then promise you won't leave again, even if the lights are calling." The room hushed around them, as though every portrait and polished surface leaned in to listen. She looked up at him, small face framed by the glow of the lamp, and her plea cut through Elvis's defenses like the purest note. The old clock's tick seemed to slow, marking the gravity of her words, a child's intuitive terror of abandonment, sharper than any critique or contract. Elvis swallowed hard, seeing himself reflected in her eyes, the man who chased spotlights and limousines, often at the cost of the one place he truly belonged. He felt the tremor in his chest, the same tremor he heard in her voice when she dared him to promise. He closed his eyes for a heartbeat, searching for the courage to set down his crown. "I promise," he whispered, voice husky. He placed both hands on her small shoulders, meeting her gaze. "No more leaving. Not for lights, not for anything." His forehead rested against hers, sharing a breath in the darkness. The outside world, the demands, the deals, the dizzying roar of applause, fell away, leaving only the steady pulse of his daughter's trust. In that stillness, father and daughter held their vow. The grandfather clock resumed its unhurried rhythm, echoing gently through the silent grandeur of Graceland, and under the quiet watch of the magnolia-lit windows, Elvis Presley felt the weight of his promise settle in his bones. An anchor stronger than any stage, a light brighter than any spotlight. The morning light filtered through the heavy velvet drapes of Graceland's study, casting long tendrils of gold across the polished mahogany desk. The walls were lined with platinum records and framed concert posters, each a testament to Elvis's reign as the king of rock and roll. Yet today, the room felt smaller, tighter, as though the trophies themselves held their breath in anticipation of the confrontation to come. Elvis sat behind his desk in a crisp white shirt and dark slacks, the top button undone, sleeves rolled to his elbows. His dark hair was still damp from the shower, and the faint scent of sandalwood aftershave clung to his collar. He had spent the past hour reviewing financial statements and skimming through fan letters, striving for calm. The only sound was the tick of the brass clock on the mantel and the distant hum of the air conditioning struggling against the Memphis heat. A sudden knock at the door stilled the air. Elvis looked up as the door swung open, revealing Paul Berlin, Colonel Parker's hawkish attorney and unofficial PR consigliere, striding in without invitation. He wore a three-piece suit that could have been tailored for a Wall Street broker, and his pause at the threshold was more a calculated hesitation than a courtesy. "Elvis," Berlin began, voice oily and clipped, "we need to discuss your contract obligations. Colonel's—" He paused, dropping his eyes to the floor, before meeting Elvis's gaze. "Colonel's not pleased with these delays. Vegas is selling out fast, and we can't afford any setbacks." Elvis's jaw tightened. "Paul," he said evenly, "I'm aware of my commitments, but I'm handling family matters at the moment." His hand drifted to the small wooden photo frame on the desk, capturing a summer afternoon he and Lisa Marie had spent laughing by the pool. Berlin glanced at the photo, then back to Elvis, smirk flickering. "That child's delaying more than just one show, isn't she? We can't let sentimental whims jeopardize the bottom line." He crossed the room in 3 brisk strides, planting himself before the desk. "You've seen the projected revenue. Millions at stake." Elvis rose, the chair's casters scraping lightly against the rug. He met Berlin's eyes with sudden steel. "That child isn't a symbol for you to pawn off. She's my daughter." Berlin's lips curled. "If the kid's in the way, put her on a plane to Priscilla, and let's work." His tone was businesslike, disturbingly so, as if discussing logistics rather than family. In that instant, the last tendrils of restraint snapped. Elvis's fists clenched at his sides. The hum of the air conditioner seemed to throttle in shock. He stepped forward, voice low and dangerous. "You're out of line." Berlin sneered. "I speak for the Colonel, and for your bottom line." Elvis's hand lashed out, shoving the desk lamp toward Berlin. The lamp wobbled on the polished surface before crashing to the floor in a spray of hot metal and shattered glass. Papers fluttered like wounded birds in the sudden stillness. "Get out!" Elvis's roar filled the room, a raw force that shook the framed records on the wall. "Get the hell out of my house!" Berlin's smug expression flickered, replaced by startled indignation. His tailored pants brushed past the scattered shards as he turned on his heel and marched to the door. He paused in the frame for a final barb, voice icy. "You'll regret this, Elvis." And then he was gone, the study door thudding closed behind him. The room fell silent, the only sounds the slow drip of a broken water glass and the dying tick of the mantel clock. Elvis stood at the center of the room, chest heaving, Sweat beaded at his temples, and a dull ache throbbed in his palm where he'd gripped the lamp. He turned toward the shelves of gold discs, the weight of their silent witness pressing in. Behind him, a small, cushioned noise broke the hush, the soft patter of bare feet. Lisa Marie stood in the doorway, her nightgown slipping from one shoulder, eyes wide and glistening. She clutched Teddy to her chest, her voice trembling as she finally spoke. "Daddy, I heard everything." Elvis's breath caught. The fierce adrenaline drained from him, revealing only raw vulnerability. He crossed the room in 2 strides, lifting his daughter into his arms. Her arms wrapped around his neck, and she pressed her face into his shoulder, muffling her sobs into his shirt. I'm sorry," he whispered, voice cracking. "I didn't mean for you to hear that." Lisa Marie pulled back just enough to look into his eyes, her small face streaked with tears. "I know you mean it," she said in a shaky breath. "But you promised. You promised you wouldn't leave me." Elvis closed his eyes, chin trembling as he held her tighter. The roar of the world outside, contracts, cameras, the Colonel's demands, fell away. All that remained was this moment of fierce, imperfect love. In the hallowed hush of his study, under the watchful gaze of records and photographs, Elvis Presley made the only choice that mattered. He would stand by his daughter, come what may. Lisa Marie pressed her back against the pale pink door of her bedroom, heart thundering so loudly she feared it might betray her secret. The hallway beyond was dim, lit only by the narrow strip of light slipping beneath the door's bottom edge. She could hear her father's shuffling footsteps on the polished oak floor as he retreated toward the study, each soft tap echoing like the closing of a chapter she feared to read aloud. Quietly, she knelt and slipped a folded sheet of stationery beneath the door. Its corners caught on the threshold for a heartbeat before vanishing into the darkness on the other side. The paper was unlined, heavy as a promise, and her small hand trembled as she adjusted it just so. The words she'd written, trembling in crayon and careful cursive, felt raw against her chest. "Daddy, I want you more than they do. If you go, I won't be angry. I'll just pretend I never had a daddy." She pressed fingertips to her lips, tasting the sting of tears she wouldn't let fall. Her breath slowed until the only movement was the gentle rise of her nightgown, pale lavender with tiny daisies, and the steady beat of her own resolve. Then she slipped to her bed, huddling beneath the white quilt where shadows stretched like quiet watchers on the walls. The corridor was silent, save for the distant hum of the air conditioner and the soft tick of the grandfather clock in the foyer. Elvis reached his study door and paused, hand on the tarnished brass knob. He frowned at a crumpled scrap of paper still clinging to the frame, a discarded set list from last night's impromptu jungle room session. His lips pressed together. He didn't notice the absence of her small footsteps until he closed the study door behind him. He flipped on the desk lamp, its shade casting a pool of golden light over ledgers, unopened mail, and a single photograph of him and Lisa Marie at the pool, both laughing. For a moment, he stood motionless, the warmth of the light at his back and the pale glow from the hallway beneath the door, each calling him in different directions. He moved to his chair, sinking into its leather embrace, the weight of the day settling behind his eyes, like dust. He rifled through the piles of papers, contracts, fan letters, medical bills, searching for something that felt as urgent as the ache in his chest. His fingers brushed a blank envelope on the corner of the desk. It was small, unmarked, heavy in his hand. He stared at it, puzzled, then laid it aside and opened his Rolodex instead, flipping through names he no longer wished to call. Behind him, the lamp's glow dimmed with each tick of the clock, Elvis rose and padded toward the door, sensing that something, some quiet tremor, persisted in the air. He placed a hand on the knob, but something made him hesitate. A soft rasp of paper unfolded somewhere on the other side. He stood still, hearing the faintest drag of a crayon across stationery. A child's breath held too long. Elvis pulled the door open an inch and peered down the hall. No light spilled from the stairwell. No silhouette lingered in the moonlit carpet. He closed the door quietly and crossed to the desk, snapping on the lamp's full brightness. The blank envelope still lay there, until he noticed the sheet beneath it, its edge just visible. He picked it up. The handwriting was small, round, unmistakably his daughter's, loops and dots formed by tiny hands. He unfolded the letter. "Daddy, I want you more than they do. If you go, I won't be angry. I'll just pretend I never had a daddy." Elvis's pulse thundered, as though he stood beneath a spotlight. His throat went dry. He swallowed hard, fingers trembling around the paper. A memory surged. Himself at 7, in the cramped back bedroom of his childhood home, grasping a scrap of lined school paper. He had written to his mother late at night, a plea she might never read. "Please come home. The day is too empty without your laugh." He remembered the ache of waiting by the window for her footsteps on gravel that never came. His small voice had trembled then, pleading for a presence he took for granted until it vanished. Elvis pressed the letter to his chest, heat rising beneath his collar. His eyes stung, tears unbidden, unvoiced. He folded the note with long, careful touches and tucked it into the breast pocket of his shirt, where it rested warm against his heart. He exhaled, low and ragged, and turned off the desk lamp. In the muted glow of the nightlight, the study transformed to a sanctuary of hush. He did not summon the guard, nor did he call for Priscilla or the nurse. He rose and, without a word, walked toward his daughter's room, each step echoing in the corridor like a vow renewed. Outside, the grandfather clock chimed 11, its resonance slipping into the quiet spaces. And Elvis Presley, king of rock and roll and father, moved through that uncovered space between stages, driven by a single, sacred certainty. He would never again let her small voice go unheard. Elvis awoke to a stillness more profound than any stage blackout. The morning sun had not yet climbed above the live oaks lining the Graceland Drive. The air was cool and fragrant with magnolia. He lay in his bedroom, two sheets tangled around him like half-made promises, heart still thrumming from the night's revelations. No portals to the outside world, no telephones, no knock on the door, just the hush of dawn. He swung his legs over the edge of the bed, bare feet touching the soft carpet, and reached for the bedside phone. The handset felt heavy in his calloused palm. A single red light blinked on Parker's line. He inhaled, steadying himself. This would change everything. He dialed. The colonel's gravelly greeting crackled through. "Presley, hope you're ready, 'cause we need numbers." Elvis swallowed, voice measured. "I'm not going to Vegas." There was a stunned pause. Then Parker's voice rushed back. "What? Are you out of your mind? You can't just—" Elvis cut him off. "No rehearsed lines, no sales pitch. I can't do it. Not right now." Silence pressed through the receiver like a weight. Elvis heard the colonel gather himself, ready for battle. "You'll ruin your career. You think the fans will wait while you play family man?" Elvis waited, heart pounding so loud he feared it would echo in the earpiece. Then he said, slow and unwavering, "They'll understand. Or they won't. But I'm staying." Parker's exclamation crackled and died. The line went dead. Elvis held the receiver to his ear, listening to the faint hum of disconnected wires. His throat felt raw, as if he'd sung the final note of a lifetime in that brutal exchange. He replaced the handset and sat in silence, the only sound the distant chime of the grandfather clock in the foyer marking the passing seconds. No manager's orders, no contract clauses, just the quiet aftermath of his decision. Rising, he walked through the empty halls of Graceland, past shiny silver platters and glass-encased awards, each reflecting the morning light like distant stars. He reached the top of the stairs and paused before Lisa Marie's door. A pale pink wreath hung on the knob, a token from some long-ago holiday. He rested a hand on the cold brass plate. Inside, the room was soft with dawn's glow. Pale lavender curtains framed a single window, the walls adorned with framed drawings of princesses and guitars. A small dollhouse sat in the corner, its windows illuminated by a battered nightlight. Stuffed animals formed a semicircle around the rug, where Lisa Marie often staged tea parties. He knelt on the polished floorboards, his knees creaking in the hush. She lay under her patchwork quilt, eyes wide in the pale light, clutching her teddy bear. She didn't flinch at the sound of his steps. Instead, she reached out, beckoning him closer. Elvis curled beside her, careful not to tangle her in his long limbs. The quilt smelled faintly of lavender and crayons. He folded his hands over his daughter's smaller ones, resting his cheek against her hair. She whispered after a pause, voice soft as a hymn. "Please don't be angry, Daddy." He closed his eyes, the promise he had just made settling in his bones. He remained silent, the space between them filled with what need not be spoken. Another breath, another heartbeat. Then she spoke again, voice wavering like a fragile cord. "I didn't want you to think I was ungrateful. I missed you for so long, I forgot how not to." Her words echoed in the stillness, each syllable a revelation. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, the quilt rustling softly beneath them. He did not answer with grand declarations. Instead, he traced the shape of her small hand with his thumb, sealing the moment in the hush of the bedroom. Outside, Graceland slept on, but in this room, a father and daughter reconciled, the world found its true beginning. Elvis awoke to the gentle hush of the early afternoon, the afternoon sunlight pouring through the tall windows of Graceland's drawing room in lazy, honeyed beams. There were no radio broadcasts blaring tour schedules, no ringing telephones demanding his attention, only the slow tick of the grandfather clock and the faint rustle of the magnolia leaves beyond the balcony. For the first time in years, he found himself unhurried. He rose from the chaise longue where he had fallen asleep reading last night's newspapers, headlines blaring about an inexplicable hiatus in his performance calendar, and padded across the oriental rug to the sideboard. A stack of glossy photo albums lay waiting, each one a chronicle of sold-out stadiums, screaming fans, and bejeweled jumpsuits that lit up Las Vegas stages. He opened the top volume and flicked through images of the roaring '70s. Crowds stretched to the horizon, a grinning Elvis raising his arms in triumph. Each photo felt distant, as though it belonged to someone else. With a gentle exhale, he closed the album and pushed it aside. He crossed the room to his daughter's door, pausing at the handle to savor the silence. Inside, Lisa Marie sat cross-legged on the floor, her small frame leaning against the door frame of her pastel bedroom as she arranged a new display of crayon drawings on her bulletin board. Each picture, bright suns, smiling houses, a father and daughter hand in hand, radiated warmth and immediacy. He picked up the nearest sketch, a simple line drawing of two stick figures beneath a rainbow, labeled "Family Forever." "Beautiful," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. Lisa Marie looked up, her eyes bright. "Daddy, want to read with me?" She patted the floor beside her. He nodded and settled onto the carpet. Between them lay his well-worn copy of the New Testament, its spine creased, pages thumbed into softness. They read a passage from John. "Let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me." Her clear, earnest voice filled the room as he followed along, the words sinking into a quiet corner of his soul. Later, Elvis wandered into the jungle room, the green velvet drapes drawn closed against the afternoon glare. In the center of the carpet lay several of Lisa's drawings he had collected, one of him singing on a stage, but his face erased, scribbled over in heavy black crayon, another showing her alone in a spotlight, the world of fans drawn beyond a barrier of stars. He lined them up on the mixing console, each a potent reminder of what truly mattered. From the console shelf, he retrieved a small pile of framed concert photographs. Elvis in 1969's comeback special, Young and Electric. Then a sea of dancers in attire aglow with rhinestones. Finally, the raw intensity of his 1973 Houston show, his voice catching in the hymn, "How Great Thou Art." He studied each for a moment, then lifted them gently and replaced them in their box. The stage that once gave him life now seemed to demand it in unsustainable measure. He leaned back in the lacquered piano bench, closing his eyes. For a moment, he simply listened, to the hum of the tape machines on standby, to the distant laughter of the house staff in the East Wing, to the soft footfalls of Nurse Carter as she checked on the baby asleep in the nursery. There was no rush, no deadline, no roar of the crowd. There was only this place, this sanctuary, and a daughter who needed him more than any encore. By evening, the press office had dispatched its latest release. Elvis Presley announces brief hiatus, fans left wondering. Dozens of newspapers printed speculations of backstage meltdowns, contract disputes, or health scares. But Elvis did not venture near a telephone. Instead, he returned to the drawing room, joining Lisa Marie at the window seat, where a basin of water and coloring pencils waited. She handed him a sky-blue crayon. Together, they set to work sketching the silhouette of Graceland under a moonlit sky. He drew the outline of the mansion's columns. She added stars overhead. She paused to scrawl beneath a tower. "Daddy and me." He smiled, drawing two small hearts in the corner. When their masterpiece was complete, they gathered on the chaise with the New Testament open on the cushion between them. He read aloud the words of Psalm 23. "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." Lisa's head rested against his shoulder, her hand clasped in his. He felt the truth of those words resonate deeper than any note he had ever sung. Outside, Graceland settled into the hush of night, its grand eaves and columns cloaked in silver moonlight. Inside, the pace of life had slowed to a heartbeat shared between father and daughter. Each moment unhurried, deliberate, profound. No stage would ever hold them more completely than this room, where the quiet was a gift and love, at last, commanded center stage. The morning stillness hung heavy over Graceland when the brass trumpet of the gate bell sounded for the first time in days. Elvis, dressed in a plain gray pullover and jeans, was in the study, idly turning pages of the King James Version he'd returned to reading with Lisa Marie. He glanced at the ornate brass frame of his front door, unused since his self-imposed retreat, and rose to answer it himself. On the stoop lay a single yellowed envelope, its edges softened by age and careful handling. The handwriting was precise, elegant, and looping. The ink faded to a soft sepia. Elvis knelt to pick it up, noting the absence of a return address. Scrawled across the front in dark, steady script were the words, "To Elvis, from someone who remembers Humes." His heart rate quickened at the name. Humes High School had been his launching pad, the auditorium where he first felt a tingle beneath his rib cage when an audience of classmates cheered his tentative tunes. He turned the envelope over, studying it as though it held a piece of his past, a key to a moment he'd never fully processed. Inside, the letter was typed on thin typing paper, its texture reminiscent of the telegrams and early fan mail he'd once received in Tupelo. The paper was creased along neat folds, as though it had traversed a long journey to reach his hands. He eased it free and unfolded the sheet, revealing words that pulsed with simple, heartfelt urgency. Dear Elvis, it's been many years since we shared that music room at Humes, but I still remember the way your voice filled that auditorium, pure and unguarded. I'm writing, not as a promoter or a manager, but as an old friend and fellow traveler, to ask a small favor. Our local children's hospital could use a song, as a balm, a beacon, a reminder that they're not forgotten. No cameras, no press, no costumes or contracts, just you and them for a few moments of grace. If you could find it in your heart to come play, I know you'd remind them why music matters. Yours in faith and friendship, Samuel Sam. Jacob's Elvis folded the letter slowly, as though reluctant to close the door on its words. He pressed it against his chest, feeling the weight of that simple request. No mention of money or fame, no hint of a promotional machine, just a plea as old as the first song he ever sang. He slipped the letter into his shirt pocket and leaned against the doorframe, eyes on the closed study behind him. For a long moment, he said nothing. The mansion felt too large, the halls echoing with memories of distant applause. He thought of Lisa Marie, of her small, earnest face, and the way her trust in him had rebuilt his compass. He wondered if he could balance the needs of the world he once ruled with the quiet service this letter demanded. He walked to the nursery, where the baby lay sleeping beneath a hand-stitched quilt. Nurse Carter watched as he slipped the letter from his pocket. "Something on your mind, Mr. Presley?" she asked softly. He offered her a wan smile. "Just an old friend reaching out," he said, voice gentle. "Somewhere, people need a song that doesn't come with flash or fanfare." She nodded, understanding. "They're lucky to have you." Elvis traced the curve of the letter's fold with a fingertip. "I hope they think so." That afternoon, Lisa Marie and he sat at the kitchen table, a plate of graham crackers untouched between them. He pushed the letter across to her, watching as she read the words in quiet curiosity. Her brow furrowed at the mention of the hospital, then softened as she looked up at him. "Daddy, what do you think?" she asked, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. He inhaled and rested his hand on the table beside hers. "If I sang for someone else, would that make you proud? Or would you feel like I'm leaving you again?" Lisa Marie's eyes grew large, her small fingers tracing the typed lines. She considered his question with profound seriousness, then exhaled in a slow, measured breath. "I think God would like it," she whispered, voice tender, "because you'd be helping them hear His music, just like you helped me." Elvis closed his eyes, feeling a swell of emotion he could not name. "I think you're right," he said quietly. "I think you're very right." Within an hour, he was on the road again. The Cadillac's engine purred beneath the humid Memphis sky as he left Graceland's gates, the golden mansion receding behind him like a treasured memory. In the passenger seat lay his guitar case and the yellowed envelope, a silent testament to the journey ahead. He drove in contemplative silence, Lisa Marie's words echoing in his mind. Each mile seemed to soften the tension in his shoulders, each red light offering a moment to reflect on the path he'd chosen. He thought of the children waiting in sterile hospital rooms, some too small to understand what illness meant, others old enough to remember a world outside their beds. He pictured their faces, each a blank canvas, hungry for hope. When he arrived, the hospital lobby greeted him not with a flashing marquee, but with the hush of fluorescent lights and the soft shuffle of nurses' shoes on vinyl. Sam Jacobs, older now, stood beside a cluster of volunteers, offering Elvis a warm, conspiratorial smile. No press, no security fanfare, just a handshake between former classmates. "Thanks for coming," Sam said, his voice thick with gratitude. Elvis returned the handshake firmly. "Thanks for asking." He unpacked his guitar case and looked over the small waiting room where parents held jittery cups of coffee and children peered curiously from behind blankets. He lifted his guitar and took a breath. Not a performance, but a quiet benediction. And when he sang the first gentle notes of Peace in the Valley, the hospital lobby fell into a hushed reverence, each heart in that room recognizing the music of kindness, the melody of returning home. Elvis stood in the hallway just outside the pediatric ward, the polished floor tiles gleaming dully under the muted glow of narrow fluorescent panels. He tugged at the lapels of his dark navy suit, the fabric heavy with the weight of sequins sewn in his own hand. For a moment, he simply breathed in the antiseptic air, the faint scent of disinfectant mingling with the distant echo of small footsteps and soft murmurings from within. He adjusted the collar of the crisp white shirt beneath his jacket. No microphone stand loomed before him tonight, no cheering throng waited in anticipation. Only a hospital room filled with 20 children, each one battling pain and fear that no stage lights could dispel. In one bed by the window, a boy lay with his ear turned toward an old radio, its volume low. He almost never heard clearly, but tonight he pressed his patch-covered ear closer, hoping to catch his father's voice. In another corner, a little girl perched on an IV stand footstool, trembling with excitement, had a chance to sing alongside the man she'd only ever seen in pictures. Nurse Carter gave Elvis a small, steadying nod. "They're ready for you, sir," she said quietly, handing him a well-worn guitar case. The handle fit like a glove in his palm, the leather marked by years of travel, yet softened by every chord he'd ever played. He closed his eyes, bracing himself against the swell of nerves and empathy that welled up in his chest. The ward doors slid open on a muted hiss. Inside, the harsh rectangle of ceiling light revealed rows of beds tucked under pastel blankets, each child's face etched with both hope and hesitation. Parents hovered in chairs at the foot of the beds, their anxious hands clasped tight against their chests. A small boy in the middle row sat up, pointing a pale finger. "It's him," he whispered. The ward fell into a hush, deeper and more reverent than any cathedral he had ever entered. Elvis carried his guitar case to the front of the room and set it gently on a rolling stool. He looked across the sea of young faces, each pair of eyes shining with expectation or guarded curiosity. He felt a lump in his throat, no bravado, no showmanship, only the raw vulnerability of a father singing for strangers' children. He took a slow step forward and lifted the guitar from its case, letting its weight rest against his body. He placed a hand on the stool beside him, steadying himself. The parameters of this performance were entirely unfamiliar. No stage technician, no booming sound system, just his voice and his instrument, unamplified, authentic. He breathed and spoke, his voice low but clear. "I once thought I had to be seen to be loved, but maybe love is what you do when no one's looking." His words drifted through the stillness and landed in the ears of every child. Some blinked at him in surprise, others closed their eyes as though absorbing a sacred secret. He let the silence linger until it felt less like emptiness and more like space for something new to grow. Then he strummed a gentle chord, letting the note ring softly against the hushed backdrop of beeping monitors and muted sighs. He began, "Love Me Tender," his voice tender as the song's title, each syllable unguarded. "Love me tender, love me sweet, never let me go." He paused at the first refrain, allowing the children to breathe in the melody. A nurse dabbed at a drip line. A mother reached across to squeeze her child's hand. And that boy with the hearing patch tapped his foot in time, feeling the vibration through the mattress. Elvis resumed, his eyes moist with the poignancy of each lyric. He felt the melody lift him and carry him through the narrow aisle of beds, his voice weaving a quilt of solace over their fragile spirits. "You have made my life complete, and I love you so." As he sang, the ache of his own recent struggles, the contract fights, the gap in his performance calendar, the fear of leaving home again, fell away. In their place blossomed a realization. He had rediscovered his purpose, not as a superstar on a distant stage, but as a man who could bring comfort to a small child's heart through a simple song. When the final chord faded into the soft hum of the ward, there was a moment so still it felt like time itself had paused. Then, one by one, the children began to clap, tiny, tentative taps against their blankets that blossomed into a chorus of gratitude. The parents rose, offering nods and tears of relief. Elvis rose from the stool, his legs trembling like a novice's. He placed the guitar back in its case and turned to each child, offering a gentle smile that spoke volumes more than any encore could. The boy in the hearing patch whispered, "Thank you," and the little girl beamed, her earlier dream realized. He left the ward without a backward glance toward the operating rooms or the nurses' stations, carrying with him the quiet victory of a soul set free. In that unlit corridor, away from neon marquees and blinding spotlights, Elvis Presley discovered again the purest purpose of his gift: to love tenderly, even, perhaps especially, when no one was watching. Elvis closed the heavy front doors of Graceland behind him and paused in the grand foyer, the hush of midnight wrapping the hall in a soft hush. The moonlight streamed through the stained-glass side lights, painting shards of cobalt and emerald on the checkerboard marble floor. Every echo of his footsteps whispered against the high ceilings and the polished banister rising before him in broad, elegant sweeps. He had returned from the children's hospital performance only hours earlier, still wearing the dark navy suit that had felt both foreign and vital in those hospital halls. There'd been no photographers, no cameras, no cheering crowd, just the healing hush of a ward full of young hearts. And now, walking through the stillness of home, he felt more tired than after a sold-out Vegas finale. The weight of new purpose settled in his bones, anchoring him firmly to the quiet promise he had made. Above, on the landing, a sliver of yellow light slipped beneath Lisa Marie's bedroom door. Elvis climbed the broad staircase, each step measured as though it were the first he had ever taken. He reached the top and lingered for a moment, his gaze drawn to the small gilt plaque that read, "Lisa Marie Presley." The door was ajar, just enough to let a single sliver of warmth spill into the corridor. Lisa Marie sat on the top step, knees pulled to her chest, and wrapped in a quilted blanket her grandmother had made. She wore a simple nightgown, pale lavender trimmed in lace, and her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders. In the dim glow, her face looked younger than her 8 years. The marble sheen of the stairs seemed to cradle her small form like a cradle. She peered over the banister at Elvis, eyes wide and expectant. He hesitated, conscious of the distance between the world he'd just left and the one waiting here for him. Then he crossed the threshold, light padding of his feet on the carpeted runner, and sat beside her. The blanket pooled between them like a shared secret. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the distant tick of the grandfather clock at the foot of the stairs, its pendulum swinging in patient cadence. Elvis rested his hand on the polished wood beside hers, fingertips brushing the smooth varnish. The silence pressed in, not heavy but gentle, an unseen embrace after weeks of thunderous demands. Finally, Lisa Marie's voice cut through the stillness, soft but unwavering. "I wasn't crying because you yelled," she began, each word a small, deliberate step. "I cried because I thought you'd never hear me." Elvis held his breath. The room seemed to tilt inward, brimming with the weight of her confession. In her words lay every note he had ever missed, every callback he had fumbled. He swallowed, throat tight, and turned to look at her. Her dark lashes framed eyes that glistened in the soft stairlight, and he saw the mixture of fear and hope that had guided her through the past weeks. He leaned down, voice hushed but earnest. "I hear you now, little girl," he whispered, the timbre of his words resonating like the final chord of a long-withheld ballad, louder than the crowd ever was. Her shoulders sagged with relief, and she leaned into his side. Elvis wrapped his arms around her, enveloping her in the warmth he'd promised never to withhold again. She nestled against him, quilt and nightgown rustling in the hush, and he breathed in the soft scent of lavender and childhood innocence. They stayed there for a while, two souls joined in a moment that needed no soundtrack. The grand portraits in the hallway seemed to watch, with solemn approval, as father and daughter reclaimed the trust that had frayed in the glare of the public eye. Each swing of the clock's pendulum marked the turning of a page, the closing of the chapter defined by absence and misunderstanding. At last, Elvis rose, with careful deliberation, lifting Lisa Marie into his broad arms. She slipped her arms around his neck, cherishing the solid strength he offered. He carried her down the stairs, each step a vow renewed, until they reached her room. He tucked her under the quilt and placed a gentle kiss on her forehead, lingering in the glow of the nightlight, as if etching the moment into memory. He straightened to leave, but paused in the doorway, turning back for one final look. Lisa Marie's eyes were closed, small face softened in sleep, and the blanket, still emblazoned with the pattern of tiny daisies, lay snug around her shoulders. He whispered into the quiet, "Good night, baby." The room exhaled in response, and Elvis stepped into the corridor. As he reached the bottom of the stairs, he felt the hush of Graceland settle around him once more, not as emptiness, but as a living testament to the bonds that truly mattered. He touched the clock case at the foot of the stairs, its tick now a lullaby of continuity and promise. Behind him, the stair landing light winked off, leaving Lisa Marie in the gentle shadow of dreams. Elvis Presley, no longer just a legend or a performer, exhaled fully for the first time in years, carrying with him the quiet truth that love, once heard, sings louder than any spotlight.